Okay, so in this video, we're gonna teach you how to make a loop-de-loop, everyone's favorite roller coaster spot. So before we even start to build or start to construct the loop, we need to consider a couple of things. Number one, where your loop is in your track needs to be an area where there's kind of a large downhill so that you can gain a lot of momentum, because to get through the loop, you're gonna need a lot of momentum. The size of your loop is going to be determined on the velocity and the momentum. The bigger the loop, obviously the bigger speed, the more velocity, and therefore the bigger hill you're going to need to approach to the loop. And also where your loop is in your track, most likely your loop's going to be kind of at the bottom of your track. It's going to be one of the last things because it requires so much kinetic and potential energy that it's probably going to use most of it up, therefore you're not going to have a lot after the loop. So keep in mind, our goal with these tracks is to have them go for a long period of time, so your loop is probably going to be towards the end. Okay, so I have determined that I want to make a 3-inch loop, so I'm going to use the same curve bending jig here, and I'm going to pick the 3-inch section right here. What I'm going to do is take a straightened piece of wire, and I should probably sand it first, because again, we're gonna be soldering some supports to these, and it's a lot easier to sand when it's straight than it is when it's curved in loop form. You can still do it if you forget, but it's a lot easier if it's straight. So there's number one, and I'm looking for that super shine. That tells me that I sanded well. Okay, so I'm gonna do the same thing with both of these, but I'm gonna do it one at a time. I'm going to go with my 3-inch loop here. I'm going to bend it right in the middle so that I have plenty of space for track on both sides. Keep bending, and push it all the way, whoops, where's 3? All the way around, like so. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, just push it all the way around. Okay. And it'll end up looking something like this. So I went a little far, but again, since we have, actually this is pretty good because we need that giant hill coming into the loop-de-loop so that we can make sure we have enough speed to get all the way through, speed and momentum. So I did this once, I'm gonna do the exact same thing with my second. I'm gonna put it right in the middle, go to 3, and bend it all the way around. Okay, and I'm going to try and do the exact same thing with both. So this might take you a couple of times to get it perfect. As you can see right now, mine aren't perfect because this is coming in at less steep of an angle than this. So I'm going to put it right back on and just bend it a little more. And that's a little bit better. Okay, cool. So what I'm looking for is the same angle on both sides. Here we're pretty darn close. Okay.
Does the length of both sides matter?
It does and it doesn't. It doesn't because we're going to connect this track to a straight track coming down anyways. And the same thing on the other side, we're going to connect this to a straight track too. I recommend that you use a fairly long piece of wire so that you have that extra track coming out on both sides, because it's easier to make that connection with the straight track. But even with something like this, we can make it work. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spread it apart by hand. And I just want to make sure that I do the same distance on both tracks. And you can kind of eyeball that, or you can measure it, whatever you're most comfortable with. So I'm going to bend it out like so. Okay, maybe a little bit more on this one. Okay. And then when you put them down, here, I'll take this away so you can see it. When you put them down, you can see that they're pretty fairly equidistant. The track is pretty much the same distance away, that 1/2 inch that we're looking for all the way through. You may have to adjust it a little bit. As you can see, this one's it's not perfect, but this is pretty close. This is what we're looking for. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to solder this kind of like one spot at a time. and then we can adjust the distance between the track along the way. Okay, so we're gonna go back the same way we did the straight tracks. We're gonna be using 2 jigs, like so. And I'm going to start with 1 jig, place both loops in 1 jig. You probably want to start with the inside one. And then right here. Okay. And then I'm going to use the other jig to kind of help stabilize, like so. And this takes a little work on its own. There we go. Okay. Let's see if I can just spread this out. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to do the very top first. You're going to want to do like a flat surface, and sometimes you have to use your helping hand to help you find a flat surface. But as soon as I get one of these connections on, it's going to be a lot easier to work with. So let's start with the very top here. I'm going to go with the same procedure. First, I want to put on my handy dandy mask and goggles. Okay, then I need some flux, I need a brush, and I need solder. There's my brush. Maybe I can take this down until I'm ready to go. I'm gonna apply some flux to the area where I want to make the connection. You don't have to put a ton, but flux can also help kind of keep the support piece on. So you want enough that that's going to happen, like so. Okay, I need a support piece, but again, it needs to be sanded because we want those grooves for the solder to be able to go into to form that bond. There we go. Okay, cool. Before you solder, you want to make sure this is in the exact position that you want it. And by that I mean it should be nice and flat on this side of the loop and flat on this side of the loop. Okay, and the distance between the 2 tracks, at least at the point that you're soldering, you want to make sure is about 1/2 inch. Okay, let's get my solder. And sometimes you may need to get your helping hand just to make sure that this doesn't fall off, because it's only flat at one little point. So let me get my helping hand to help me out. Okay, there we go. Cool, right there. Okay, now I am ready to solder. I'm going to put my mask on. Light my torch right away so we don't have gas flowing into the atmosphere. Okay. I'm going to approach from one side with the solder, one side with the torch. First I want to heat it up just a little bit so I get the flux to melt. And then I'm going to come in from one side. And as the solder starts to melt, I'm going to back the flame away because I don't want it to be too hot. Okay, and then I'm going to bring the flame in. See if I can get it to suck in between the connection. There we go. Okay, and as soon as it's in there, I'm finished on that one. Now I'm going to do the other side. Same thing, melt the flux a little bit, put solder on one side, flame on the other, but I don't want the flame directly on the connection. About 1 inch away is pretty good. You can see it still melts. And then I'm going to bring the flame in until the solder sucks underneath. Come on down. And then I am finished. Okay, so that first support piece that I made is the most crucial. I need to make sure that it's the right distance away from both, or I'm sorry, that the track is the right distance away from each other, about 1/2 inch. Then, to get your next support piece on, you have to be a little bit creative because you gotta find a way to get a flat surface so that your support piece will stay on. And you also want to make sure that you're staying 1/2 inch, that the tracks are staying 1/2 inch away from each other on both sides. Let's try it this way, like so. Okay, so right here you can see it starts to widen out a little bit over here. It starts to get bigger and bigger, which is bigger than what I want, so I can either try to do that or I can just kind of hand tighten it a little bit and see if I can get it to stay a little closer together. There we go, that's better. Okay, I'm going to do the same process. Shine up a little support piece with the sandpaper. And cut it. This time I'm going to depend on my helping hand a lot because this isn't a perfectly flat surface. It's not going to stick there on its own. I still want to flux first. Let's go right there. Flux, flux, and then, whoops, oh, that helping hand needs some help. Let's try this one. Let's go right about there. Okay, I just want it to rest right on, but it's got to be touching on both sides. There we go, that's pretty good. Okay, maybe a little farther that way. Cool. Good. Now I'm ready to solder again. So I need to put my mask on. Okay. Make sure I have about 6 inches of distance here with the solder. I'm going to light my torch real quick. Approach with the left from the solder, torch on the right, but first I want to melt the flux a little bit. And then keep the torch about an inch away. And the solder will still melt because the heat's still traveling through the air pretty quickly. Whoops, let's try over here. There we go, got the solder on. I'm gonna bring my torch in until it sucks on in. Come on, baby. And there we go. Oh, that guy wants to come too. Well, he can stay. Let's try this one. Whoops. There we go. Come on in. Okay, and we're good. Okay, so you're gonna keep repeating that same process. You're gonna kind of have to get creative about how you put supports on. You want them about probably, I don't know, maybe 1 at the bottom and a couple on, maybe 3 on the loop, and then 1 at the very, on the come down track, the track that's approaching into the loop. It's different for every size loop, but just keep repeating that process until you have a really solid track that the distance between the 2 tracks is not going to move at all throughout the loop, and then you should be good to go. Voila.